doctor Manuel no te voy a cambiar el apellido, Manuel Valencia. Quiero señalar un poco lo que hemos hecho como proyecto. Sacamos un libro, Financiamiento, Productividad y Distribución del Ingreso, y hemos hecho el año pasado varios seminarios que están discutiendo este tema. Señalando, creo que ahí también hay una mesa donde están los libros. Tenemos muchas colaboraciones, de hecho, del profesor Toporowski. Antes de, no sé, tenemos mucha gente de habla inglesa en el Zoom. ¿Puedes un poco resumir en inglés lo que hemos dicho aquí esta compañía? Lo entiendo.
Thank you, everyone. Now we are starting with the course that is going to be divided in 3 sessions. Today's session that is going to talk about the monetary business cycle and inflation targeting. Tomorrow is going to talk about Keynes Kalecki critique of inflation targeting, and on Monday is going to talk about how the capital market works. This is going to be the course in this month, and we like to thank you for your presence in the Zoom. Thank you, everyone. I don't know if you want to, Professor Noemi. Profesor Noemi.
Al profesor Manuel Valencia, solamente quisiera avisar que mañana seguiremos en el Aula Magna, y si tenemos mucha afluencia, amablemente nos han señalado que podemos pedir la apertura de esta sala.
Okay.
Gracias.
For the people on Zoom, you know that you can leave your questions in the chat, and we will pass it to the Professor Toporowski at the end of the session.
Perdón, seguimos arreglando cosas administrativas como siempre. Nos honra darle la palabra hoy día al maestro Manuel Valencia, que ha apoyado, o que su organización ha apoyado este evento. Por favor.
Y primero que nada, buenos días. Muchas gracias a la UNAM por darnos la infraestructura y este gran espacio. También a las autoridades y a las y los organizadores. Pues la UNAM siempre ha sido un espacio de pluralismo económico, ¿no? Y creo que es bien importante remarcar eso, y que creo que tiene mucha coincidencia con nuestra red de Young Scholars Initiative. Estoy hablando de una red, si no la conocen, ustedes pueden buscarla. Es parte de la Institute of New Economic Thinking. Somos alrededor de 23,000 economistas en todo el mundo que ahora, por ejemplo, se están viendo beneficiados de estar en otra parte del mundo y de poder transmitir y ver esta interesante conferencia. Entonces les recomiendo que se den una vuelta. Hay muchos eventos interesantes, ya sea en línea o presenciales, en donde pueden conseguir ustedes también un apoyo económico para asistir y presentar sus trabajos, o solamente asistir a una escuela de verano. Me permito rápidamente hacer una pequeña publicidad, que es parte de de esta serie de eventos del día 25 al día 27 en el Posgrado de Economía de la UNAM y en el Instituto de Investigaciones Económicas. Se va a tener una conferencia sobre financiamiento del desarrollo económico a 70 años, de un paper de Kalecki, que fue presentado originalmente en 1953 en la UNAM y fue publicado en 1954 en el Trimestre Económico. Entonces creemos que es un paper muy interesante que da para unir bastantes corrientes, y donde le agradecemos mucho a la doctora Noemi Levy, al doctor Toporowski, y a muchos otros y otras más que van a estar participando como conferencistas o como participantes. Así que les pido que si tienen algún momento, vayan y dense la vuelta para discutir un poco de esto. Y bueno, de nuevo, muchísimas gracias a las autoridades y a los organizadores.
Gracias. Una última cosita antes de darle la palabra a la directora. Las conferencias serán en inglés, pero tendremos presentaciones en español para que sea accesible a los estudiantes que no dominan perfectamente el idioma inglés, y las preguntas pueden hacerse en español o en inglés, como ustedes prefieren. Ojalá tengamos discusión. Es importante para la política económica del país lo que vamos a discutir hoy día. Por favor, maestra Lorena Rodríguez.
Noemi, muy buenos días una vez más a todas, a todos, a todes. Me da mucho gusto que estemos aquí en la inauguración de este ciclo que va a tener una serie de conferencias magistrales, pero también de cursos. Y quiero agradecer a la doctora Noemi Levy por la invitación a participar en esta inauguración, para darle además una muy cálida bienvenida al doctor Toporowski, que como todas y todos ustedes saben es una referencia y que además ha tenido una colaboración muy intensa con la facultad, lo cual le agradecemos. Creemos que es muy importante tener y tejer redes intelectuales, académicas, de investigación, no solo con colegas que están en la propia universidad, sino también con colegas que están en otras universidades, porque eso finalmente permite tener un intercambio que resulta muy enriquecedor para poder discutir. En este caso vamos a estar hablando pues del pensamiento de Keynes, de Kalecki, y también todo esto enmarcado en el tema de los objetivos de inflación. Como ya decía la doctora Noemi Levy, es una discusión central en un momento clave en la historia de nuestro país, pero también del mundo, en donde nos estamos replanteando muchos de las cuestiones fundamentales en la disciplina económica, y definitivamente desde la facultad tenemos mucho que aportar, y este intercambio ahora recibiendo al doctor Toporowski pues resulta sumamente enriquecedor. Quiero saludar con mucho gusto a quienes me acompañan en esta mesa, por supuesto a la doctora Noemi Levy, al doctor Manuel Valencia, también al doctor Jorge Bustamante, al doctor Roberto Valencia y por supuesto a nuestro invitado especial, el doctor Toporowski. Como ya decíamos, va a ser una jornada muy intensa, y además me da mucho gusto ver aquí no solo a estudiantes de nuestra facultad, todas las personas que están siguiendo en redes esta transmisión, sino también a mis colegas profesoras y profesores. Creo que precisamente estos espacios son los que nos permiten hablar de esa visión plural, de esa visión crítica que ha caracterizado a nuestra facultad, y que es algo que no solo debemos de procurar que permanezca, sino precisamente fomentar y crear los mecanismos necesarios para que podamos tener estos intercambios plurales, críticos, y en donde estemos analizando una serie de cuestiones desde con nuestras diferentes herramientas. Y pues al final de cuentas todo esto también creo que resulta muy enriquecedor en la formación de nuestras y de nuestros estudiantes. Así que estoy segura de que estas jornadas van a ser muy productivas en ese sentido. Esperamos una amplia participación, como ya la tenemos el día de hoy, para que podamos seguir discutiendo y analizando en conjunto. Una vez más, muchas gracias a las y los organizadores, y por supuesto a quienes nos acompañan. Y pues bueno, con esto daríamos oficial y formalmente iniciados los trabajos de estas jornadas que se van a llevar a cabo de los próximos días, y que seguramente van a ser muy buenas en el sentido de poder seguir discutiendo, analizando en conjunto. Y pues muchas gracias a todas y a todos.
Muchas gracias, Roberto. Nada más nos haría el favor de decir lo que va a seguir y daríamos inicio a la siguiente mesa. Gracias.
Claro, muy buenos días a todas, a todos. Solamente para resumir un poquito la dinámica, que algo ya se ha platicado, pero pues vamos a tener dos conferencias magistrales, el día de hoy y el día de mañana, a cargo desde luego del profesor Toporowski. Hoy va a ser comentada por el doctor Jorge Bustamante, y el día de mañana me tocará a mí realizar esa labor. Las dos presentaciones van a ser en inglés, pero los PowerPoint van a estar en español como apoyo. Lo mismo va a pasar el próximo lunes, donde se incorpora con nosotros el doctor Malcolm Sawyer en una mesa redonda donde participará pues, la profesora Levy y el profesor Toporowski. Tenemos un formato híbrido, así que las preguntas en línea les pedimos que las dejen en el chat. Ya estaremos los respectivos moderadores atentos para poder presentar sus preguntas a los profesores que estarán participando. Y finalmente, quienes están aquí en la sala, les pediremos que su participación sea de manera oral, ya sea en inglés o en español. Entonces, bueno,
Gracias.
sería sobre.
Perdón, al último, pero no menos importante, un agradecimiento a todos los colaboradores del proyecto. Trabajo arduo, aquí se ve. Y iniciamos. Gracias. ¿No? Ah, ¿el micrófono?
Okay. Yes. Okay, well, thank you very much for welcoming words. I really do want to thank, in particular, Professor Noemi Levy, Professor Robert Valencia, Dr. Julia Garcia, Professor Lorena Rodriguez, Dr. Jorge Bustamante, and all the other people who have contributed to organizing these lectures. It's a great honor for me to be here in this company, and it's the honor is greater for having those people assist with my lectures. I would also want to apologize for a certain lack of culture, my inability to lecture in Spanish. This is it's something that I should really overcome, but it does mean that I have a special debt to the translators who have translated my slides so that you can better understand them. Okay, I think if we can move to the first slide. Right, yeah. Okay, let's move on to the course summary. I call this a course summary in the sense of a rough summary, but these are the titles of the lectures that I will give in this program. Today's lecture on the monetary business cycle and inflation targeting. Tomorrow, I will give a separate lecture on the critique of inflation targeting that is maybe found in the works of Keynes and Kalecki. And the third point is the third lecture will be one on Monday, shared with Professor Noemi Levy, Professor Malcolm Sawyer, on what capital markets do, a special element of this particular program. Okay, let me briefly summarize today's lecture. Really, I want to cover 5 points today. One is the argument that the monetary business cycle is in effect inflation targeting. Inflation targeting is a version of the thinking behind the monetary business cycle. And then I will go back to the original monetary business cycle of Hawtrey, Hayek, and Wicksell, many others, but there were many others who contributed to the idea of a monetary business cycle, but they're really the key authors who started the whole discussion of a monetary business cycle going. And then this leads on to the more recent post-Second World War version of the monetary business cycle, which was the one around the work of Milton Friedman and the monetarists. And this then is transformed into what's often called neo-Wicksellianism, or the new neoclassical synthesis around the influence of monetary policy on inflation, but also the business cycle. And then I'm mindful that a lot of this is a lot of these ideas were developed in the industrialized countries with developed financial systems. So I want to say a few words at the end about how they may or may not apply to in developing countries and emerging markets. I'll just say, before I move on to the substance of the lecture, a couple of words about my methodology. I'm looking at the works of many economists and economic thinkers who were writing 100 years ago, even 150 years ago, in the case of, or 125 years ago, in the case of Wicksell. And you may wonder, well, what is the relevance of this? And my justification really comes from the great development economist and economic theorist, social economic theorist Gunnar Myrdal, who wrote a very important book published in actually before the Second World War. It was translated into English and published in 1954 on the political element of economic in economic theory. And he argued there that economic theories are never disproved. We're sometimes taught that if you do enough statistics and apply them to economic theory, then we can verify which theories are correct and which theories are not correct. So the theories that are not correct fall out of the picture, and we move on to the theories that are correct, so that the present textbooks give us a summary of, or today's textbooks give us a summary of the correct theories. This is not true, as Myrdal pointed out. What actually happens is that no theory is ever disproved. Theories move in and out of fashion. And what we have had in recent years has been a moving into fashion again of the monetary business cycle. And this is why, to properly understand today's economic policy and today's economic theories, we do really need to go back to the original monetary business cycle that I will discuss later today. So my argument today is that the monetary business cycle is the same thing. It's much the same thing as inflation targeting. Inflation targeting is the ruling doctrine of the central banks in most countries of the world, and certainly the most important central banks in the world. They are founded. Inflation targeting is founded on the idea that economic dynamics, in other words, changes in economic activity, changes in the, including price changes, are due to monetary factors, that we need to understand how monetary policy changes those the economic dynamics, changes in economic aggregates, but also changes in prices, so that inflation and changes in output and employment are always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. In other words, they are changes that respond to monetary stimulus or monetary suppression. The term always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, many of you will associate or will notice this was a famous remark by Milton Friedman about inflation, but in the form, as I will argue later on, the form in which he put it, it applied also to changes in output and employment, so that monetary policy is the key policy instrument for governments. Even if you use, for example, the more recent macroeconomic modeling using dynamic stochastic general equilibrium, where there is supposed to be no systematic business cycle, but instead there are shocks to the system. The shocks may be technological. There's usually supply side shocks. Most recently, the shocks, events such as the COVID pandemic, or the war in Ukraine, these are treated as changes in supply parameters, and there are the subsequent price changes are properly treated with monetary policy, either through variations in the money supply or changes in the rate of interest. Of course, in this there is a sub-theme, a discussion within the monetary business cycle about independent central banks, on the grounds that central banks that are independent are the only ones that can be relied upon to operate monetary policy properly and efficiently against the inflationary target or any kind of business cycle target or employment target. And what I will argue in the rest of this lecture is that inflation targeting is really a revived version of the monetary business cycle. The same idea that monetary policy can influence inflation because inflation is part of response to monetary phenomena. Okay, let me look at the oldest monetary business cycle. This is the monetary business cycle of Hawtrey, Hayek, and Wicksell. I think of all of these, probably Wicksell should have been the first chronologically, because he was still writing at the towards the end of the 19th century. Hayek and Hawtrey was writing before the First World War, and Hayek too was active at that particular time. But Wicksell, although Wicksell became very well known in the German-speaking discussion of monetary theory, monetary policy, his important work, Interest and Prices, was not translated into English until 1936, and only then, after that, started to have an impact on economic discussion. So let me start with Hawtrey. Hawtrey's seminal book is Good and Bad Trade, published in 1913, where he put forward the idea of how monetary policy, monetary factors work within within a closed economy. He talked about an economy that was operating on an island economy, and there is a money supply, and he looked at what happens if there is if the money supply rises, it changes the the amount of money that is held by people on the island, and gradually, in the first place, it stimulates economic activity. So it stimulates output and employment, but gradually the equilibrium is reduced, and the original equilibrium is resumed at a higher level of prices, so that the larger amount of money is used in circulation, in what Keynes later called industrial circulation, in circulation between households and firms. So this was a kind of a monetary business cycle which at that time appeared very new, and it pushed Hawtrey to the forefront of British economists. At that time, however, the discussion among British monetary economists was really marginal. The most important monetary economics was discussed in German, and at the center of it were the economists in Vienna, among whom was Hayek. And it was Hayek who investigated this monetary business cycle more thoroughly, and came up with the idea that in a system of general equilibrium, if you have where we have no government, no foreign trade, and no foreign trade to disturb the economy, naturally, if you take out consumption, you're left with saving, and this would generally equal investment. But this is if we're speaking about intended or voluntary saving, people who spend a certain amount of money on consumption, and then the rest they put aside as savings for themselves for the future. However, Hayek pointed out that there's nothing in a free market economy, there's nothing to ensure that the amount of saving that happens is the same as the amount of investment that happens, for a very obvious reason, and that is that the people who do the investment are not the people who do the saving. The people who do the investment are firms, predominantly enterprises, they're entrepreneurs. The people who do the saving are households. Yes, maybe to some extent, entrepreneurs may have their own savings, but it's not the same person, and these have to be coordinated through the market, and the rate of interest doesn't work properly or efficiently, and the balance between investment and saving is made up by bank credit expansion. If a firm does not have enough saving for its investment, if it cannot borrow enough voluntary saving in the money market for its investment, then it goes to the bank to borrow money. So you have credit expansion is the balance between investment and saving. And this gave rise with Hayek to a doctrine of forced saving. What did he mean by forced saving? Well, if credit expands, it means that the money supply is expanded, because credit in the process of when a bank lends money, it creates a bank deposit which the borrower can use to spend. So the amount of money, the amount of purchasing power in the economy, these economists talked a lot about purchasing power. The amount of purchasing power in the economy increases, and because the amount of goods in the economy hasn't increased, then eventually prices will rise, or the equilibrium amount of goods hasn't increased. Eventually prices will rise, and if wages do not rise, if incomes do not rise, then real incomes and real wages will fall. So the goods that now can no longer be bought are resources that are not used or not consumed in the economy. So, and they are therefore, because they're not consumed, they're saved. So this is the Hayekian doctrine of forced saving. Hayek put this, did a lot of studies on this, went right back to Ricardo to argue that this is implicit in monetary theory, and that it was really what the monetary business cycle benefited from was, first of all, you needed to have a proper banking system which would not lend so easily, would only lend as much as there was voluntary saving, and then the system would stay in equilibrium. So inflation was seen as an aspect of redistribution of income and forced and inflation through inflation. With Wicksell, the process was different, and certainly Wicksell is probably the most fundamental of the early monetary business cycle theorists, because of the systematic way in which he studied not just the data, but also the different theories. He argued that the real variable, the proper variable that monetary economists should look at is the rate of interest. And in particular, the difference between a natural rate of interest, which was the marginal productivity of capital, and the money rate of interest, the rate of interest in the money markets. He argued that if these two rates of interest differed, then they would be brought back into equality by arbitrage between investment, production and investment, and the money market activity, the advance of credit. So, for example, if you had if the money rate of interest was lower than the marginal productivity of capital or the natural rate of interest, then firms would borrow money. It would be profitable to borrow money and buy capital equipment for production, expand the capital stock, and in this way get to expand the capital stock, move into an economic boom. So the economic boom would continue until the natural rate of interest was equal to the equilibrium rate of interest, and then when the expansion would stop, and then because the money rate of interest had increased to the natural rate of interest, or the natural rate of interest had decreased to the money rate of interest, and then the economy would just proceed in a static way until, if the money rate of interest fell below the natural rate of interest, then investment would stop, the economy would contract, disinvestment would take place. So it was a very quite a sophisticated, it is quite a sophisticated theory of the monetary business cycle, which, curiously enough, the terms used by Wicksell are still used today. So this is why it's worth looking at Wicksell's original. Either way, the emphasis in the monetary business cycle was always on the money supply, or the quantity of money, or the short-term rate of interest. The short-term rate of interest, that is the rate of interest in the money markets. The short-term rate of interest was sometimes used by these theorists. Sometimes it was the money supply. The money supply approach matches the common macroeconomic model that was used before the First World War, which was the model of Leon Walras, the Walrasian general equilibrium, where the money supply is the numeraire. It's simply one commodity out of the many other commodities that are there, that's used as a numeraire against for valuing all the other commodities. So it's very much a commodity theory of money. If you are interested, the Walrasian general equilibrium is a static model. If you were interested in dynamics at that time, then what you did was you looked at the effect of a change in this commodity money supply, the effect of this change on the rate of interest in the money supply, so that if the money supply increased, then that money becomes less scarce through a higher ratio of the money supply to other commodities. So the rate of interest then becomes like the prices of other commodities, it becomes an index of the scarcity of that commodity, and not necessarily the price at which transactions take place. And this becomes the flaw in the Walrasian general equilibrium. I'll say a little bit more about this commodity theory of money as it was, understood as it was developed. Commodity theories of money, according to the great German-American Marxist Karl Niebel. I say the great German-American Marxist. He was great, but he's hardly ever heard of, hardly ever mentioned. But he did write a fundamental book, Studies in the Classical Theories of Money. And the person who brought this book to my attention was Victoria Chick. And it is a very, very fundamental book looking at how ideas on money emerge in classical times. And Niebel argued that a commodity theory of money is essentially characteristic of mercantile capitalism. The form of capitalism that existed before industrial capitalism. Mercantile capitalism is when merchant capitalists use money to buy stocks of goods which they're going to transfer somewhere to sell, transfer between markets. So that this, hence, the relative scarcity of money to other commodities is important because it's an index of the practice of capitalists that they buy in one market and they sell in another market, rather than what later came with industrial capitalism, that capitalists, yes, they buy commodities, but they use them in production. They undertake a production process and only then sell. They're not just simply moving between markets. In the case of Hawtrey, there is a mercantile monetary transmission mechanism. The short-term interest rate determines the management of stocks by retail traders. Hawtrey used this mercantile idea to explain the monetary transmission mechanism, because he argued that the big retailers or wholesalers of goods borrowed money short term in order to hold stocks, and those stocks would, as they were sold, the money was used would then be used. The money obtained from selling the stocks would be used to repay the borrowing. So it's short-term borrowing, but if interest rates go up, then obviously holding stocks becomes expensive. So retailers and wholesalers reduce their stocks. So higher interest rates discourage stock building, and also the orders for such stocks, because he saw he Hawtrey understood that it was orders for such stocks that were the signal for production to take place, rather than any other, rather than the producers being affected by the short-term rate of interest. This is an interesting idea. The VIX, for VIXAL, as I said, this was not, the argument was different. It was, the monetary transmission mechanism was a process of arbitrage between the money rate of interest and the rate of profit in production. How much more time have I got? See? Okay, that's fine. Okay, the monetary business cycle. In the period after the interwar period, in the interwar period, the monetary business cycle was defeated by Keynesianism, and in the policy discussion, and this policy, what emerged from this Keynesianism was a kind of general equilibrium version, the new neoclassical synthesis, ISLM, whatever you like. It was a general equilibrium version. There wasn't a concept of a monetary business cycle except as the changes in interest rate or changes in the fiscal balance, which would give rise, or government expenditure, which would give rise to a new general equilibrium. The general equilibrium modeling applied. What was missing in that general equilibrium modeling was what the monetary business cycle had, which is a concept of what is the market process or the financial process by which we move from one equilibrium to another equilibrium. And the person who brought this back was Milton Friedman, with his monetary business cycle using adaptive expectations. Adaptive expectations to justify the lag between a change in the money supply and a change in the rate of inflation. But Friedman had a very clear idea of how this process takes place. The process takes place through people gradually adapting their expectation of inflation to whatever is the current rate of inflation. And if you read the works of his follower David Laidler, Laidler has puts this argument forward very, very nicely, and in fact, he puts it forward as being an interpretation of Keynes. This is what makes this interesting, and I will talk about this Keynes interpretation tomorrow. The Friedman version of the monetary business cycle was overthrown, very rapidly overthrown in the 70s and the 1980s by what was sometimes referred to as the rational expectations revolution. The rational expectations revolution, which in effect took money out of the whole process. In effect, the business cycle becomes a real business cycle in which changes are the economic dynamics are created not by any monetary factor, but by changes in the level of voluntary employment. Because, as you will know from your studies of the rational expectations theory, a fundamental doctrine in rational expectations is that markets always clear, and in particular the labour market clears. In the rational expectations analysis, the rate of interest has a different function, or it's defined in a different way. It is the rate of discount of future for current consumption. And in effect, if the rate of interest changes, the so-called monetary transmission mechanism without money is actually changes in saving and consumption over time, so that in Laidler's condemnation of Lucas, equilibrium is maintained without a single monetary transaction. There is no money in the system. However, one of the features of the monetary business cycle and of monetarism, certainly the early form of monetarism, was that the insistence on the idea that the money supply controls controls the rate of inflation, and the instrument for regulating this was to be open market operations. So what I find interesting about monetary policy practice is that it made central bank open market operations, it put those at the center of monetary policy. Something that changed later on with neo-Vixellianism. With neo-Vixellianism, this emerged as the new neoclassical synthesis as a result of the failure of monetarism in the 1980s. The failure that arose because the rate of inflation and the growth of the money supply moved in opposite directions to how they were supposed to move according to monetarist theory. The money supply in the late 1980s continued rising in most economies very, very rapidly, but the rate of inflation was falling, and this was inconsistent. And the central banks knew that it was inconsistent. And when the central banks were under pressure to reduce inflation, and they were succeeding at it, but the money supply was still expanding, it meant that they had to change their policy framework, what they call their policy framework, the system of of rules for deciding day to day on monetary policy. So there was a revival of interest rate policy. This is inflation targeting proper. The abandonment of open market operations. Once it was agreed that the rate of interest was the critical variable, then the target of monetary policy came to be setting an official rate of interest and making sure that the banks, in their dealings with each other, maintained that rate of interest. Now, you can do that very, very easily by the central bank announcing its policy rate of interest, announcing the policy rate at which it will lend reserves. And in fact, that then becomes all they need to do is announce that, and the banking markets, the interbank market, will follow along with that rate of interest, because it doesn't make sense to have a different one. So you actually had something which was which should have been thought of before: the abandonment of open market operations, and in the 1990s, and what those open market operations have been doing is they had been a form of liquidity management, and when they were abandoned, they led to financial crisis, the dot-com bubble, and the 2007-8 crisis. I will be talking more about this on Monday. In neo-Vixellianism, for example, in the famous three equation model of Svensson, the central bank policy rate of interest operates through the interbank rates. The interbank rates are the crucial monetary transmission mechanism, and usually it's the short-term rate of interest. The economic dynamics are supposed to respond through channels of monetary policy, the monetary policy transmission mechanism, to differences between the policy rate of interest and the equilibrium rate that keeps inflation on target. And this is where the discussion, certainly the discussion in America and amongst American monetary economists, starts to echo the Vixel's analysis between the natural rate of interest and the equilibrium rate of interest. In particular, after the 2008 crisis, as interest rates go down to virtually zero, and there appears to be no effect in the economy as a whole. The economy stays in stagnation, and then there are arguments as to whether this is the natural rate of interest is below or above, or the equilibrium rate of interest is below or above the money rate of interest, and so on. So, but it becomes very difficult. The economies slide into deflation, so it's very clear that the rate of interest is not controlling the rate of inflation, and this is blamed on a breakdown in the monetary policy transmission mechanism. When you look at the practice of inflation targeting, it's very often it's done through forward-looking policy. They talk a lot about forward-looking policy. In other words, not looking at today's rate of interest, today's rate of inflation, but predicted rates of inflation in the future. Well, this is one way or another. It doesn't really make much difference if the predicted rate of interest is the one that is based on today's rate of interest. Predictions are always based on today's or recent rates of inflation. Sorry, predictions of inflation are based on recent rates of inflation. So the new neoclassical synthesis emerges with Woodford in 2004, his book on interest and prices. This is where he combined the new neoclassical dynamics, stochastic general equilibrium, and introduces it certain new Keynesian features of price rigidities, particular Calvo pricing, or if you want to introduce, for example, a typical new Keynesian idea, the concept of hysteresis in the labour market. So what you do is you fix the wage rate that it doesn't adjust immediately to what's happening in the market. So the markets don't clear automatically, and in this way you remove the instantaneous equilibrium, but you can still get what Woodford showed is that you can get a certain convergence which mimics the business cycle. In the Woodford model, and I'm now coming to my end, there is no money or finance. The rate of interest is the policy rate that influences the rate of discount of future consumption for present consumption. And in other words, how much resources need to be put aside for consumption in retirement. But this is voluntary. This is voluntary saving. This is Hayekian voluntary saving. The post-Keynesian alternative that criticized this was largely one of horizontalism. Yes. Horizontalism, in other words, the idea that there's a demand and supply of money. The demand for money is inversely related to the policy rate to the interbank rate of interest. And if the central bank wants to keep interest rates stable, then they have to supply as much reserves as will enforce the policy rate in the interbank market. So this becomes a way of explaining the stability of interest rates. It brings in a certain crude version of the monetary transmission mechanism, and the concept that central banks want to keep this monetary transmission going, and they will accommodate with reserves as required. This is not the same thing as liquidity management, but it is a way of keeping interest rates stable. And post-Keynesians argue that there should be a low interest rate regime to support fiscal policy and encourage investment. Well, this is, as I will argue tomorrow, this sounds good, but actually is not quite what Keynes had in mind. And I'll come back to it tomorrow. So let me conclude with just a few remarks about developing countries and emerging markets. For developing countries, and this is, and I put this forward as just the outcome of my own researches on developing countries, is that the rate of inflation is determined principally by the exchange rate and the supply of basic necessities, essentially because basic necessities are the ones that are most commonly bought by the populations of developing countries and emerging markets. People who are poor only consume basic necessities. The middle classes buy imported goods, and that's affected by the exchange rate. I can give examples of this, but we can mention it some other time. The exchange rate is a monetary variable. It's a monetary variable, at least in the sense that it's determined in a market where the currency of one country is exchanged for the currency of another country. It is outside the central bank control. It's outside historically, there have been various attempts to place the exchange rate under central bank control with foreign exchange controls, but this is extremely difficult and largely unsuccessful. And I would argue that what interest rate policy does is it drives the dollarization of finance. And this you can see in many developing countries where, as a result of the monetary policy, interest rates are very high in the domestic currency, and this merely encourages firms and governments, in other words, the big the corporations, the big borrowers, to borrow not in their domestic currency but in foreign currency. So this is a different situation, which is where I would argue that the monetary transmission mechanism is different, and the monetary business cycle is different. And in fact, the monetary business cycle is, I then explain, I think, in this in a paper, in a chapter which I contributed to a book that's being put together by Noemi Levy. But this is a complex argument. I don't have time to go into it here, but we can discuss this on some other occasion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Professor. I think I speak for all of us It is an honor to have you here. So, next, vamos a darle la palabra al doctor Jorge Bustamante para algunos comentarios sobre la presentación y les pido que vayan pensando sus preguntas, también quienes están por Zoom, óptimamente en inglés. Y pues, adelante, doctor.
Muchas gracias. For me, it's an honor to share this roundtable with you. And I'm honored because it's the first time that I have the opportunity to comment your lecture. I'm going to be brief. Voy a ser breve, así que no se vayan. No mucho, pero. I'm going to start to saying that the presentation of Professor Toporowski on the monetary business cycle and inflation targeting is a deep and detailed analysis that connects classical and modern economic theory with current central bank practices. Okay. Next, please. Okay. No has puesto mi... You need to put my slide. Yeah. Bueno, la presentación está en español. I'm going to talk to read this in English and okay. Professor Toporowski's let me put this in other words, is summarizing that the orthodox theory of thinking is not evolving at all. You know, actually is going backwards because it's back into the theory of Loanable Funds theory and the concept that is an abstract concept of the natural interest rate. You know, for me, it's not only an abstract concept. It's I can say that it's like an air, like an air. Okay. Next, the first one. Okay. The first one. This slide is talking about the first point of Professor Toporowski, monetary business cycle and inflation targeting. Toporowski explains the link between the monetary business cycle when inflation targeting, arguing that changes in the monetary supply and interest rates are fundamental to understanding economic fluctuation. That Professor Toporowski is explained to what Professor Toporowski is explained to us is how orthodox theory describes the effects of the movements of monetary interest rates and quantity of money over investment decisions that can distort the equilibria and produce cycles of inflation and deflation. The basis idea is the difference between monetary interest rate and the natural interest rate. The idea that independent central banks are the key to controlling inflation is a central point in the presentation for the orthodox economic theory. Okay? Because links the movements of... now, however, this raises questions about effectiveness of this independency in different economic contexts, especially in developing economies. You know? The next one, please. The next one talk about the point that theories of Guthrie, Hayek, and Wicksell, where the basis idea is that the monetary policy it can be wrong in put the nominal interest rate that is different from for natural interest rate. Yeah, this is the main point of this. The presentation does a good job summarizing the contributions of these classical economists to understanding the business cycle. Wicksell's theory of the natural interest rate and the monetary interest rate is particularly relevant for understanding how imbalances between saving and investment can generate economic cycle. Because we are recalled what Hayek says, that monetary policy or central banking is cheating. It's cheating the people, it's cheating the agents. If for that reason, we can distort the equilibrium. This is the main idea, okay? Okay, the discussion on the mercantile theory of money and its application in mercantile capitalism is very interesting because links the movements of the interest rates and credit money with the business cycle and the mercantile speculation. You know, remember the work of Hotry. The next one, please. Monetarism and rational expectations, you know. Remember that Friedman and Lucas, they create a theory of expectations. I'm going to put this in simple words. If you are rational, you cannot be cheated by the monetary policy. Yeah. I'm going to switch this. I'm going to switch to Spanish para explicarlo. Si somos racionales, lo voy a poner en español. ¿Sí? Si tenemos expectativas racionales, conocemos el futuro. Entonces no podemos equivocarnos, ¿verdad? Y si conocemos el futuro, ¿para qué estudiamos economía, no? Entonces, digamos, ese es un punto. The critique of Friedman monetarism and the introduction of rational expectations is an important point. The idea that business cycles can be explained by real factors due to the lack of information, people mistakes, and not just monetary ones, is a necessary counterbalance to more traditional theories. However, the presentation could have explored a little bit more the limitations of rational expectation. I know that it wasn't the objective of this. Okay. Especially in the context of extreme uncertainty, yeah? Such during the pandemic or the war, you know? Okay. Next one, please. Okay. When we are going back to the analysis of neo-Wickselianism and the new neoclassical synthesis, I need to say that the new neoclassic consensus that actually rules the monetary policy is not new, because the things that I have explained. Okay, the discussion on the neo-Wickselian and the new neoclassical synthesis is interesting, especially in how it combines elements of neo-Keynesian theory with dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models. We are talking about Woodford, the book of Woodford there, 2004. We must explore these critiques of the orthodox box a little bit more further, especially in terms of the ability to predict and manage the financial crisis. Okay. Next one, please. Okay. Developing economies and emerging markets. The idea that inflation in these countries is determined by exchange rates and the local supply of basic goods is important, because inflation targeting policies may be less effective in this context due to dollarization and the need for over-evaluated exchange rates, or even in other contexts. Okay? Then I'm going to talk about a little bit more the basis assumptions of the orthodox economic thinking. Next one, please. We know that money is a veil. It's a veil from this economic thinking, because the equilibria are achieved through market forces in the real sector, where the most important market is the loanable funds market. In this market is where the natural interest rate is determined by consumers' decisions over saving. Okay, we need to recall that. Inflation is a monetary phenomenon because they assuming that monetary policy can influence demand. In other words, the sensibility of IS curve, remember IS curve, to the interest rate now that we know now as Taylor rules, no, works fine. However, inflation can be consequences of supply problems that can be aggravating with the increasing interest rate policy. Okay, maybe you are going to talk about this tomorrow, or maybe on Monday. Monetary policy alone is sufficient to restore equilibrium. We know that this is not enough because we need fiscal policy. But in the mind of orthodox thinkers, there is a crowding out effect. The quantity of money and interest rates, endogenous money or exogenous money. We know that after Friedman and Lucas, we begin with the discussion of between the selection of the right instrument to get with the economic policy, monetary policy, and we begin with the discussion of endogenous money or exogenous money, no, and discretion versus Taylor rules, no? Okay. I want to put this again, the abstract concept of the natural interest rate. This takes me to the next question. Really, is there this kind of interest rate? Saving equal to investment. We must debate this idea that saving from families, consumers, is financing investment. And the idea that financial sector works only as intermediate, no? Because you know that it's impossible to think that the saving is enough for the saving of the families, when in these times we know that the save of these families is even negative. Yeah, then we need to think about that. Okay, expectation. How they affect the degree to which policy influences consumption and investment decisions. Monetary policy surprises, because this is the idea that was in the debate of Keynes and Prescott. The degree of unpredictable. The old debate between discretionary policy versus policy rules. The argument is that rationality expectations limits the grade of cheating or surprise of monetary policy over agents. Okay? Then I have to recall that question. Next one, please. What is the natural rate of interest? I put this slide to see what this means. That the natural interest rate is equal to marginal productivity of capital that is equal for example, in the problem solved by Woodford, in the decision, intertemporal decision of actual consumption and future consumption. No? Then the natural interest rate is a result of the decisions of the individuals. Okay? I think this is a joke for me. Okay. However, we know that is an abstract concept that is supposed to be equal to margin and productivity of capital and the intertemporal consumption decision between actual and future consumption. Okay? This is the main argument of Bixel in the sense that natural rate is determined by the intertemporal decision of consumers of saving in their dynamic maximization consumption process. They change the actual goods for future goods and services. This is the result of these equations. Okay. The next one, okay? Here I put the three equations from the new neoclassical theory of monetary policy. We know that the first one is the IS model equation. The second one is the Phillips curve, and the last one is the Taylor rule. Then they build this model of monetary policy on the basis of these three equations. Okay, let me put some critics about this equation. The next one, please. First of all, they think that IS curve has this shape, but this shape is because they suppose that interest rate affects in a sensible manner to the investment. Kalecki says other things about it. Maybe this curve is not in the shape. Maybe it's horizontal. We don't know. Yeah. This is what I need to put this, because this is a critic from inside this theory. Okay. Next one, please. Okay. That's the expectatives. I'm losing my. Okay. Don't worry. I said, yeah, next one, please. Okay. This is another interesting curve is the Phillips curve. No, they know that if monetary policy has effect on underemployment, the Phillips curve needs to have this shape, the negative slope, But if there is rational expectations, we know that the Phillips curve is the slope is completely vertical, and the monetary policy with rational expectations doesn't have effect on unemployment, only over inflation. That is the principal argument of Lucas. But what happened in reality? Next one, please. I have some quotes about the slopes. Yeah? For example, first one, from Gordon, the slope of the short-run inflation-unemployment relationship has flattened. Then it's horizontal. No? The slope of the Phillips curve itself has been getting flatter even since the 80s, and is now quite small. There is no well-defined natural rate of unemployment, either statistically or conceptually. Then you know who is writing that? Solo, yeah? And the last one, the natural rate is an abstract, unobservable, model-dependent concept. That was written by Borio. That is a guy that works in the Bank of International Settlements. I don't know if he's still working there, but just retired. Okay. Sorry. Next one, please. Well, I have some points that I would like to say, but I think we have. I don't know if I have time enough.
Yes.
Yes,
15 minutes.
15. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Developing economies. Interest rate differentials are crucial to maintain macroeconomic stability, because our structural commercial deficits. This is why we need to promote the inflows of capital through the interest rate differential. For that reason, we promote overvaluated exchange rate to control prices, making cheaper import goods. And this interest gap produces financial dollarization and corporate dollarization, because the cost of financing abroad is cheaper for the big enterprises, and they prefer to issue debt in the international markets. And this is an explanation that big enterprises in our countries are overcapitalized too. And the lack of for that, we have a lack of development of our financial markets, because we prefer to finance it abroad than inside in our domestic markets. Okay, I have a couple of questions for you. The first one: how can the effectiveness of inflation targeting policies be measured in different economic contexts, especially in developing economies, where exchange rates and locally supply of basic goods play such an important role? The next one: what happens when independent central banks fail to control inflation with their interest rate policy? And finally, how can central banks in these countries, even in developing economies, developing economies, could manage inflation when they do not have full control over exchange rates? Okay, that are my comments and questions and necessities, maybe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
On Zoom, I don't know if someone has some questions. Aquí, okay. Wait. I'm going to.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. I just have one clarification question. You mentioned that most of the authors that you presented at the beginning focus on the short-term interest rate. I don't know if you can tell us a brief note on the long-term interest rate, like what's the debate on that? And I wonder if it has changed now with the new Vixelians. Yeah. And second of all, do you think these theories that you presented really well do have something to say by the fact that the money market, it's a trading market, basically, so that we have huge market makers as traders, and that in itself, it's very difficult to actually assess the policy of a central bank as binding to actually set the interest rate in the market. And also the fact that also the currencies are inherently hierarchical. And with this, I just want to point out two basic lessons from 2008-2009 crisis on the importance of money traders and on the different dynamics of different currencies. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I would like to ask you a question related with your fifth slide, because it feels like the macroeconomic models are fitted for the developed countries, and here in underdeveloped countries, we have a different characteristics like high informal rate. Here in Mexico, around 50% of the force works under informal conditions, and we have a low unionization. So I am wondering if there is a big difference because the effect of the monetary policies between developing countries and underdeveloped countries, taking into account these characteristics like Mexico and America Latina, and that's what is the influence and income distribution between both kind of countries, developed and underdeveloped countries. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the last point.
The difference between the monetary policy between developed and underdeveloped countries, and what are the effects on the income distribution.
The effect on economic
Income
distribution. Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And my question is this one. You put forward the idea that theories don't change, and particularly the classical theory. I think it's something like new wine in old bottles. They just come back into fashion. So my question is, what could possibly modify the analytical framework of neoclassical theory?
Sorry, what?
What could possibly modify the analytical framework of neoclassical theory? Because the economic phenomena of the reality, if I can say that, doesn't modify its framework.
The acoustic is very bad.
Yeah.
Would you like to answer these questions and then we get yes? Or do you prefer to take some other?
No, I
Okay.
I can do this. I can answer this in. I can answer this in perhaps in reverse order. But thank you for all the questions. This. What's the way of changing the theory? I'm not sure that I'm not sure how easy it is to change theory, and I'm a little bit skeptical about whether changing the theory will change the practice. What we really need is to change the practice. And if you really want to change society, you should change. You need to go into politics. And I don't think economic theory is very helpful for changing society. But what we really need, if we want to change the economic theory, is to be much more is careful, do much more work on how the markets actually operate, how what are the structure of the markets. Well, Minsky always argued that the starting point for your economic analysis for a capitalist economy with a sophisticated financial system, you have to analyze the debt structures, and this is the way forward. But I think if we go back to what I said about Gunnar Myrdal, there are already plenty of theories around. I will be discussing some of them tomorrow. The Keynes Kalecki analysis, which offer alternative views, and we should look at those, and we should be more. But we should examine all theories more critically, and in this way we find the ones that are relevant to today. The effects of monetary policy on income distribution. This is something again that there's been a lot of discussion of this in around the topic of financialization and the way in which the amount of financial transactions is expanding extremely rapidly, much more rapidly than the economy is expanding. And what does this mean for the distribution of income, the growing inequalities in societies? I think that there is an effect, but it's very much an indirect effect, because what's happening in the financial markets is much more about the liquidity of the wealthy rather than increasing the wealth of the wealthy. It's true that people make a lot of money in the financial markets. Is this particularly significant for the more general distribution of income? I think the more important for the more general distribution of income is to raise the standard of living of people at the bottom. And I'm not. I don't think that you can do this through finance. Finance can be an instrument and can support this, but not. Finance. It's through politics and policy that we. I come back to this. It's through politics that we change society, and not through changing the financial system. Informal rates of exchange and interest. Yeah, I think that this is a very, very interesting topic, and it brings in the whole concept of financial control, which is vital for both for financial stability, but also for issues such as controlling, making sure that the financial system operates for the benefit of society. And I would say that I think a lot of the black market or informal markets are really a symptom of a lack of failure of financial control, but that has to be addressed through examining how the markets are working, rather than saying that rather than trying to abolish certain activities. Can central banks control interbank activity through monetary policy? This is the key thing, because it's become very obvious to me since I was doing work on in central banks and looking at what goes on in the interbank market, is that quite often a lot of what happens in the banking markets is really the central banks manipulating banking markets because they want to make a particular rate of interest effective. Whether this has any beneficial effect or not on the economy doesn't really matter. The central bank wants to be seen to be following an effective monetary policy. Long-term interest rates, yes, they're coming back with yield curve control, but what I would, and there were certainly periods when central banks were trying to force 10-year bond rates down to zero or even below. I think that this is I don't think that this is a good policy, because it was in effect creating too much liquidity in the financial markets and not contributing to a stable market. But I'll say something more about this tomorrow. How can central banks of developing countries control inflation? That I'm not sure that they can control inflation, and this is the fundamental difficulty. They put the disadvantage of inflation targeting. One of the reasons why I feel so critical of inflation targeting is that it created a hubris around central bankers, and central bankers were can control things which they cannot control. Now I will come back to this. By the way, I am one of the advocates of inflation targeting in his time was Charles Goodhart, and I remember a discussion I had with him not so earlier, I think about a year ago, when he was arguing, no, when inflation was low in 1990s up to the 2008, it was because the central banks were lucky. It wasn't because of anything that they did. So that would be my view. Jorge's comments. Yes, I agree with. I think of a very valid. I agree with them all, particularly about the abstract nature of the natural rate of interest. This was something which became obvious in some of the American discussions, because no one knew where the natural rate of interest was, and depending on how you calculated it, you got different results. So it is difficult. How can the effectiveness of inflation targeting be increased? Well, I don't know, but I'm very. I don't think that central banks should advertise abilities that they don't possess. You know, if you can't control inflation, it's better that you say that you can't control inflation than that you pretend that you can.
Thank you. We have two more questions. Yeah, can you do your question? Yes.
Okay. Do you want to take any others? Okay. Yes, the problem of dollarization. This, I think, is a fundamental aspect of monetary control, which I think is which has been neglected because central banks and the central bank discussion has focused monetary control discussions on the control either of the money supply or of the control of the rate of interest and the interbank rate of interest. There hasn't been a proper discussion of the problem that affects many more people in developing countries, which is the problem of dollarization, and how do you prevent the monetary control from completely slipping out of the hands of the central bank. And then with the loss of monetary control comes the loss of financial control and the inability of governments and firms to conduct financial operations. It's a very serious problem, but it's something that, in the first place, I think it's technical. It's technical in that it's necessary to understand where the dollars are circulating, where they're coming from, and how they are circulating and among which economic agents, and then also technical in the sense that there are instruments that central banks have to control the amount of money in the amount of foreign currency in domestic circulation. But you have to, it's a much broader problem of banking then I think economists are completely unaware of this. You have to understand banking. You have to go into banking to be able to deal with this particular issue.
Well, thank you, Professor. I think we're going to have like a whole week to discuss these topics about developing economies, all these issues, maybe a brief observation or comment about why I focus on the presentation was about, for example, the supply constraints phenomenon on developing economies related on Kalecki theory of developing economy, and maybe on the other hand about you in one of your works, I don't remember which one, you say something about the distributional phenomenon related to the developing economies. Maybe it's a part of this question that you said before. There is a lot of to discuss about the income distribution actually related to monetary policy. So, but anyway, we are very excited to hear you tomorrow. I think maybe in this, a lo mejor en esta sala o en el Aula Magna, y el lunes en la mesa redonda con el profesor Malcolm Sawyer. Mañana el profesor Roberto Valencia estará comentando en la segunda parte o la siguiente parte de estas mesas. Y pues nada, creo que eso es todo. No sé si hay algo más, doctora. Pues muchísimas gracias. See you tomorrow, professor. Thank you.
Thank you very much.